What is going on YouTube today? We are live. Awesome. So, today we are going to be talking about pain and suffering. But before, let me get just the spiel out real quick. I am not a professional counselor. So, take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm currently working towards my getting my master's in clinical counseling. So, eventually, I will be a professional. But until then, take my word with a grain of salt. And I'm just here to kind of talk about mental health and a little bit about everything. So I love doing this live stream. It's been real fun. I've gotten some interaction with some people, and it's just been a good time. But let's move on to this week's topic, and that is pain and suffering. So, pain and suffering, that is something we all go through. Pain, whether whatever form it may take on, because we all know it has many different shapes, sizes, forms, um, anything, and it can just become a something in our life that ends up leading to suffering. It doesn't always need to lead to suffering, but it can. And pain tends to usually have that ability to kind of lean towards suffering when it needs to. There's a few things I want to talk about in regards to it. And I think some of the objectives I've learned in clinical counseling and some of my classes have really kind of pushed me towards a certain train of thought, which is existentialism. And that's kind of basically there's a lot more to go into it, but broad the basic of it is basically like the bigger questions, like what is the meaning of life, like what am I doing, am I truly happy, what is true happiness, stuff like that. And kind of to move on, or kind of to bring in some Greek mythology of this aspect, there was this one um, Greek person that was called Sisyphus, and basically his story was that he cheated death twice, and he was able to, or once he died, he actually was condemned to push a stone up this hill to eventually it would fall down the other side, and constantly do that. And basically, it was kind of twisted and formed into this form of thought that's existential. That no matter what we do when we're on this earth, and where if we're on this planet, everything we do is kind of meaningless, but there's also a kind of, I know that's like really harsh to say right away, but it's kind of neat in a way that it kind of relieves you and kind of relieves some stresses that you may have. Um, so I always thought that was a very interesting story, and actually one of my favorite philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche. Um, he was also very in existentialism, and he actually used that Greek myth to kind of into his ideologies and stuff, and the pain and suffering. And he really believed that suffering was something that we all gone through, and just not having meaning in this life. But again, suffering is something that we not choose to go through, but don't necessarily have to. And it reminds me of one of these psychologists. His name was Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychologist. Or see, now I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry. I had too much information ready, and this is what happens when I get too into it. So, okay. He was a psychiatrist, actually. He was a Jewish Austrian psychiatrist, and it was during the time of World War II when Jews were being put in concentration camps, and he actually went into a concentration camp. So, moving forward, this is what I wanted to open with about pain and suffering. That he's gone through so much pain. He went through four different um, concentration camps, all within like a year or two, and he's seen some of the most horrible, just unfortunate, just terrible things that humans are actually capable of. And it's heartbreaking. But he also came out and he knew that he was set to do something, because he knew that he put meaning on his own life to finish studies and his manuscript and every idea that he had to kind of push along that information to the next generations, to what we have now. And one of the most uplifting and inspiring stories is that when it comes to suffering, it all comes down to our perspective and what we allow to happen, and what we allow it to do to ourselves, whether it be physiologically or mentally. And although he was in the concentration camp seeing terrible, terrible things that are being done to his uh, fellow humans, he was he told the story that no matter what happened, no matter what they did, the only thing that the guards and the Nazis couldn't control was his frame of mind and his perspective. And that came down his suffering. Although he may have gone through unbelievable pain, seeing his father die, all this stuff, he was unable and no, he wasn't unable. He did not allow himself to suffer because he didn't want to give the guards that power into his mind, in his perspective. And that is just something that I think is incredibly motivating and inspiring, and just something that takes such a strong will of character. And he just one of the one of the person that always comes to mind when I explore the different parts of clinical counseling. And I think that's just one of the main stories that's just really inspiring overall. And it's just, yeah, it's just something that we all go through. I mean, pain. Jonah Hill recently, if you want to watch something more modern, Jonah Hill just released a movie with his therapist. Um, there were some things in this that I were kind of hesitant to, whether when it comes to when it comes to the multiple relationship things that we talk about in clinical counseling, and just the certain things that were said, it was surprising that a therapist would allow to do that. But that's beyond the point. In the movie, there are some very good parts that I think are very beneficial to some people's frame of thought, and it seemed to have helped Jonah Hill through a lot of problems that he's gone through. But one of the main things that Stutz, his therapist, said that there are three things in the life um, that nobody can avoid, and it's pain, working, and uncertainty. And I think that kind of goes it goes in a line with what we're talking about today, pain and suffering, because pain is something that everyone will go through, no matter what you are, whether it's pain financially, whether it's pain emotionally, physically, or mentally. And that's just something that you will never get away from. And I think it's imperative to kind of realize that and focus on what we can do and how we can limit the suffering from the pain that we unfortunately will have to bear eventually at some point in this life. And um we talk about many different things. I mean, but then again, there's that uncertainty, the unexpected pain, the loss of a loved one. That's just something that you can't really prepare for. That's something that you will not be prepared for. And that has that form of aspect of pain and uncertainty that we're all inevitably have to interact with throughout our life. And it's just something that kind of it stinks, but it's also something that's true. I mean, there's nothing you can do to kind of combat that. But again, it comes down to the pain and suffering that not strengthening, um doing what you can to really limit the blow that comes along with suffering. I'm not saying you can't grieve or you can't feel despair or anything, but just tr- being able to treat yourself in a way that is beneficial to the recovery or understanding of what's to come next, and not leaving and continuing on in your own journey after something that's excruciating painful that may have happened to you in your life. And I think those are just some really big topics. I know they're really heavy and it's really hard to talk about, but pain again is something that we're all going to go through, and suffering, although you don't have to go through it all the time necessarily, I still think that it's a very important aspect when it comes to life, that kind of makes us what it is to be human in in a sense, because the suffering that we go through is possibly something that we may be able to use in or may be able to use to empathize with someone. If we've gone through something similar, we're able to not feel exactly what they may be feeling, but we may be reacting similarly in an emotional or behavioral way that we can see kind of runs parallel with the other. And when we do that, we're able to see kind of differences in behavior, different expectations, different frames of mind, different perspectives. And that's how a lot of the time, counselors will see that and kind of bring together a group who may have gone through similar experiences when it comes to pain, such as sexual abuse, grievance, death, or loss, substance use, and anything like that. Because a lot of those aspects have pain, but there's a lot of other things. It could be parents who've lost a child, anything. Again, it just comes down to the pain and what it does. But having gone through similar situations, counselors are able to see that and bring together. That's where we see groups and this um, group therapy happen, where it can may be beneficial because someone who may be experiencing completely different and be experiencing in their perspective as to what is going on and what they are feeling is completely true to their truths, but and they may be suffering in a way that another person may not, or they may have another person might have figured out how to kind of relieve that suffering. And when you get them together and talk, and you get these people just kind of telling their stories and what they did, sometimes that motivates or inspires or gives other people a different way of looking at things to kind of help end their suffering. And that's all because they had that shared experience of pain. And I think these two go hand in hand, and suffering can be beneficial in the sense that it allows us to connect with one another, because at the end of the day, we all have gone through the root cause of that, which is pain. Whether whatever it may be, the pain that is driving and the underlying factor that's pushing this suffering is something that we've all gone through. And I think it's an important thing to come together and talk about with others, when maybe in regards to like group therapy or something, or or any group that may help other people kind of relieve any type of um idea, or not idea, any type of suffering that they may be going through. um there was another thing I wanted to talk about. Where are you? um Yalom, I think it was Yalom who, yeah. So, um, basically his ex Yalom. So that was one of the first psychologists that I briefly mentioned before when I was kind of just all over the place. I did not have it structured. I had a little bit too much information, and when I'm not kind of just going smoothly, that's kind of what tends to happen. So now we're gonna kind of rewind and go back to Irvin Yalom. He, sorry. So he was a psychologist, and he also is an existential psychologist. So that is something that I really think is important. And this is an important frame of mind because it really puts things into perspective that one day you may not be on this planet. And understanding that and accepting that is the first step into kind of, in my idea of relieving some of that stress and dread that you may be feeling like you're not accomplishing enough. And I think it's important to, I love that. I may break it down and talk about existentialism another time, but I don't want to get too far into it. But he was a pioneer when it came to existential psychotherapy, so kind of leaning into Freud with a little bit of existential. Um, and basically, one of his ideas was that mental health problems are frequently caused by struggles with existence. And those are common themes that are kind of the underlying factor. And the main three that he really liked to talk about is one, fear of death. I mean, who doesn't? Who's not afraid of that? That's a terrifying thought. And the drive towards freedom. This can be interpreted in many different ways, but I also think that it also has to do with existence and the pain that may come along with it, and the desire to avoid isolation. That is another huge one. We are animals that are run in pride and packs. I know we have a very individualistic culture in the United States, but that doesn't mean as people we tend to group with one another, and we don't prefer isolation. We see even in brain function that when we're together with others, there's increased brain activity that kind of aligns with like the dopamine that happens and occurs in our body, and serotonin, because we enjoy being with other people. And so those three are the main common things that are the drivers for mental problems, as per Yalom's theory. And I think those have a lot of merit. I mean, he's a very well respected psychologist and existential psychoanalysis. Um, so I mean, again, like he's way more bigger professional than I am. He has books, studies, all types of different things. So I would really go. I would urge you to really go read some of his stuff. He's very interesting. We talk a lot about him in our first year of clinical counseling. For some reason, I don't immediately think of him when I talk about psychoanalysis and existential, even though it's like my favorite two combination when it comes to different theories and therapies and techniques. Um, but he is there. He's very important, and um, I get reminded him every once in a while. My one professor really loves his work and loves talking about him, but for some reason, my brain just always forgets that he's an existential psychotherapist. Um, but yeah, so I thought those three are very important. Those common themes of the drive towards freedom, the desire to avoid isolation, and the fear of death. I think those are can be underlying factors when it comes to mental health problems that are frequented by existence. Because existence, you really have to you think about death, you think about being eventually not being on this planet anymore, eventually you, your friends, your family, like, and it's a scary thought, and it can be, but there is a lot of information on existentialism and why it can be beneficial to think this way. um, because one, it's true, and or not true, sorry, one, it can have some truth to it. And yeah, it's just, I think it's something that if you go down it, I just read a new book. It kind of aligns with existentialism, and it's called The Sunny Nihilist. I'm going to do a video on it, so on my YouTube channel, so make sure you watch out for that. But it's just a fantastic book that talks about nothing really mattering, but the sunny side to it, in the sense that it doesn't have to be negative if you frame it in a certain way and perspective. So that kind of again goes to the idea of pain and suffering. So yeah, there may be a pain of coming to the realization that eventually you will leave the planet, but there's also, instead of suffering and constantly thinking about that, you won't have time to worry about what's important to you. And that, I think that's a really, really beautiful kind of thing. Because if you're so caught up worrying about, oh my gosh, nothing matters, then you're gonna lose all that time instead of thinking about what matters to you instead. Um, we may be small in this universe, but what we do is meaningful to us. And I think that's a really important aspect that we need to hold on to when you're traversing this ideology that is nihilism, existentialism, or psychoanalysis. That's not really too much connected, but regardless. But yeah, so I mean, again, we all go through it. Antoine Paris, hello. Thank you for stopping in. Um, Yeah, so today we talked about pain and suffering and something that we all go through. It is something that we cannot get rid of. Um, Pain, that is, suffering. It all comes down. I'm not saying if you suffer, you don't have a strong mind, or it's just comes down to that there are certain aspects that you do not have to suffer through, and with a certain frame of mind, you can kind of maneuver them more strategically in a way that may be more beneficial to your mental health. So I liked what we talked about today. We did talk about a lot. I will try not to be have. I'll try to have my. Is it just me or two? It says two people are in here right now, so it's you and someone else, Antoine. I don't know who. I can't see that, but yeah, it's two people. So um, but yeah, so thank you for coming in. I haven't seen you before, but I love when people come in and kind of talk in the chat. Today we talked about pain and suffering with mental health and what it kind of has to do. Um, awesome. Thank you. I hope to see you in the future. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't really have too much else to say about that. I know I talked about a lot. I hope you guys look back at it and kind of watch a little bit. Sorry about I rambled on in the beginning, but I really just enjoy talking about certain aspects, that is existentialism and existentialism and nihilism. And I think those are very important topics to talk about when we're talking about pain and suffering. So I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you for um, thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe. I have more videos that come out every week, and I do this live stream every Monday. So make sure you comment, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, so that way you can make sure you're here for every single Mental Health Monday, and we can continue this conversation about different mental health aspects and what we may be able to do to kind of help our own mental health. So thank you again for watching. I will see you guys next Monday. I do not have Madden 23. Sorry.